First up, some more serious stuff, though. You would have seen the start of the political year, one of the stories of it so far. Jenny Macklin, the Families Minister, being buttonholed on whether or not she could live on the dole, whether or not she could live on $245 a week. You'd know that as of the 1st of January, as many as 100,000 single parents, 90% of whom are women, moved from the single or partnered parenting payment to Newstart. And that'll mean a significant loss in weekly income of $60 to $110 a week for single parents whose child turns 8. Previously, the way that it worked was when your youngest child turned 16, you had to move on to Newstart. But the new change means many more Australians on the dole. As I say, the question, could Jenny Macklin live on it? The answer, well, people were doubtful. And then, of course, many in the community wondering, well, what would it be like to live on the dole? Could you afford it? Or would it be a situation of a bad spiral beginning and being made worse, so the dole making it harder to get a job and not easier? We thought we'd talk more about it this morning. It was interesting to hear your stories at the time about what life is like on the dole. Doug Cameron is as Labor Senator for New South Wales, and he talks to us this morning. Mr. Cameron, good morning.
Good morning, Leon.
And so this has prompted a debate in the community, the consensus in many quarters that most could not live on the dole. Could you?
Oh, of course I couldn't. I think certainly I couldn't live and have a reasonable lifestyle. I could exist on the dole, and I think that's what most people are doing. They are existing by relying on charity and being in increased poverty. I don't believe that's living.
While uncomfortable for Jenny Macklin, has this conversation driven a further discussion inside the caucus about the dole and the rate at which it operates?
Well, the caucus hasn't met over the period that this comment was made, but it certainly is a problem where, the Labour Party, who, in my view, should be looking after the weakest and most vulnerable in the community, are trying to save $727 million over 4 years by taking payments away from the weakest and most vulnerable.
What should happen?
Well, I think we should defer the legislation to make this change. There's been a recent Senate inquiry has made that recommendation, and it had a majority of Labour senators on that committee. So the Labour senators said, look, the evidence we've had is that you just exist when you're on Newstart. The Newstart allowance needs to be increased. There is no evidence, only assertions, that forcing people onto charity and forcing them into poverty is an incentive for them to get a job. There is no evidence that that's a proper analysis.
So why then did your party decide that as of the 1st of January, single parents whose kids turn 8 go onto the dole rather than onto the parenting plan?
Oh, I can only assume that there are some arguments that this is a cost-cutting measure that should be taken. I mean, we were in the process of trying to achieve a balanced budget, and I argued continually that you shouldn't try and achieve a balanced budget off the back of weak and vulnerable people. And that argument continues. There's
an argument, of course, that if you make the dole too luxurious, that people won't have the incentive to get off it and get into work.
But let's get this into context. The dole is 30% below the poverty line. You see, I don't think a lot of people realise this. They think the dole is allowing people to live in some luxurious fashion. I mean, I have personally, I've never been on the dole, but I've been involved in a number of significant industrial disputes when I was on the tools. I was living on $80 a week, and I know what that does to your finances. I know what it does to your future. I know what it does to your kids and your social exclusion. People are socially excluded when they are on such low payments. So it's not an incentive to get a job. How do they clothe themselves to look decent to get a job? How do they get from point A to point B and pay the transport costs? These are big issues, and I think that it's a legitimate debate within the Labour Party. There are different views, but I think the view should be that the Labour Party should be looking after those that can't look after themselves.
Do you think you'll be going to the next election, and this is an election year, with the dole at the same rate that it is at the moment?
I hope not. I hope not. I mean, this inquiry, the Senate inquiry I spoke about, the Liberals indicated that they wanted to continue this process of having, 30% less than the poverty line for the payment for the dole. I think this is a good distinction between the Labour Party and the Liberal Party about who tries to look after all Australians. And we should look at increasing the Newstart allowance. We should actually look at being compassionate. We should look at helping people get jobs. I've got no argument about people getting a job.
And yet, Doug Cameron, in recent days, it's been the Liberal Party that says we should be considering as a country lifting the rate of the dole, not yours.
Oh, well, you see, this is, Tony Abbott on his, weather vane approach. His committee members, the Senate members of the Liberal Party said they shouldn't change anything.
But it's you from your party calling for a review of the dole at the moment, not necessarily Jenny Macklin or indeed the people who make the final decision.
Yeah, but, there's got to be a role for backbenchers. There's got to be a role for the Labour caucus. There's got to be a role for a voice outside of executive government that says the Labour Party's values and principles should be to ensure that we look after people that can't look after themselves, that we help people get a job. We recognise it's better being in a job, but we also recognise that there are some people in some areas around the country who just cannot get a job, and to force them into poverty, to force them to rely on charity, in my view, is not the Labour way.
What should the dole be? Do you have a view?
Well, the committee has argued there should be an increase of $50 a week. Some of the groups such as ACOS are arguing an extra $50 because what's happened over the years of the Howard government, the payment for the dole declined significantly against the average weekly wage, and it's been declining. We're now amongst the lowest for welfare in the OECD, and I just believe there is a role for welfare in society when people are doing it tough, and you don't force them onto poverty. So the argument is $50 a week. I think there should be other incentives to try and help them get a job and to provide more employment, as the government is trying to do. But there are some areas where there is entrenched unemployment, where there is high unemployment, and we still haven't recovered from the global financial crisis. So if you're in one of those areas, then you need government support, and you shouldn't be forced on a 30% below the poverty line.
Appreciate you talking with us this morning.
Good, Leon. Thank you.
Doug Cameron, that's the New South Wales Labor Senator on your local ABC round Victoria and 774 ABC Melbourne. It's 9:15. You're welcome to join us, 1300 222 774.